Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, COVID-19 has rarely inspired good news, including this week as the illness numbers continue to climb. But at least there was genuine encouragement that a vaccine is on the way. We'll look tonight at the war against the virus and who's winning. And this is an election weekend, including a critical race for Orleans Parish DA. We'll examine that campaign plus other local contests, as well as runoffs for the Public Service Commission and Congress. All of this plus another name surfaces in the church scandal investigations. The U.S. Supreme Court considers split jury verdicts, and a new development at Clearview may indicate what some shopping center areas of the future will be like. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Stephanie Grace, political columnist for the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate, and David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Go over to Gordon first for the latest COVID news, the numbers, the vaccine. Where are we now?
Well, as you said in the intro, who's winning right now? I mean, I think you'd have to say the virus is winning right now, unfortunately. But we have, on the other hand, we have this good news on the way, but it's not here yet, and it's going to take a while to roll out. So what you're seeing is a continuation of a trend we've seen throughout the fall and into the early winter, which is steady increase in the number of cases all around the country. And it's frankly much worse in a lot of the country than it is in Louisiana, but it's been going up steadily here. I should say the data is really difficult to decipher in a lot of ways. The number of cases, of course, is very high, but there's more testing than there's ever been. So it's not necessarily the greatest metric to look at. And the same kind of goes for the percentage of tests that are coming back positive. But if you look, I think maybe the best metric to look at is hospitalizations. And when you look at that, you can see that Louisiana has had 3 distinct phases of this virus with steep peaks. And the one that we're in right now is almost as high as the first 2, and it's still going pretty much straight up. I mean, we had a 22% increase in hospitalizations this week, and I think we're around getting close to 1,400 people in the hospital with coronavirus. When the highest peak was around 2,000, so we're not at that yet. But just for context, when we got better control of the virus, we were down to about 500 people in the hospital. So it's quite bad right now. So that's it's not as bad in New Orleans as it is in a lot of the states. So that's good for us. It is getting worse here as well, though, and in some of the suburban areas. So I guess. The bright side is we're not doing as poorly as some parts of the country, but this is really as bad as it's gotten in America. And you're seeing, 3,000 people die a day in some recent days, which is as bad as it's ever been. So that's all quite discouraging, I would say. I mean, as we mentioned, the good news is that a vaccine is really on the way, and we're expecting to get the first 40,000 doses for Louisiana by mid-December.
And let me ask you that, would this be the Pfizer vaccine that we're talking about doses?
That'll be the first one that we get, yeah. And others hopefully after that. The Pfizer one it comes in 2 installments, 6 weeks apart. As you may have read, it has to be kept very, very cold. I think it's minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which creates some challenges for storing it and so forth. But it's going to be delivered to hospitals initially. And the first people who will get it will be so-called frontline workers, a lot of whom will be healthcare workers, I imagine. And there's plans that are still being developed, but about who gets it when, depending on both the kind of work that you do and also the kind of risk you're at. People who have pre-existing conditions, people who are older, people who live in nursing homes. So depending on where you fit on that spectrum, it could be a while before you get it.
Now, these doses are being shipped out, but the emergency authorization for use, has that been given yet?
It has not, I mean, I know there's a bunch of different terms here, but I think a couple of other countries have done this already, and we're in the process of doing it. But it's a guarantee pretty much that that'll happen. I think they've already said the first doses will be shipped out in mid-December, but I think we're still waiting on that sort of procedural step. I think the United Kingdom has done that, and maybe a couple of other countries.
Right, and the actual vaccinating people. The inoculations will not begin until that authorization is given. Is that correct?
Correct. And then, there's a lot of steps to this process, and then they just have to ramp up the production. And so it's going to be, I think it'll be, I've seen estimates that it'll be the middle of next year before, most people who want the vaccination have gotten it. And that could change depending, there's going to be different vaccines as well.
Right.
A lot of factors here, but it's not going to be something where we turn on the switch in mid-December. But I do think, I'm expecting that, as people get vaccinated and as a lot of people, more and more people have already had the virus, that perhaps we'll see the numbers of new cases diminish as a result of that, just because the virus won't have as many uninfected hosts or, people who are susceptible to infect. So perhaps as we get into the spring, things will start to improve even before everybody's vaccinated.
Because we've been seeing these numbers go up, and we haven't yet seen what Thanksgiving travel, how that's going to impact the numbers too. That's something we need to wait for. What about schools?
Well, so I think schools have been having some problems. I mean, we had a story on the front page of the newspaper today about how there's hundreds of cases in area schools, and then also a lot of kids are in quarantine because they've been exposed to somebody who has it. And there's, I think, several thousand people who are in quarantine. But I mean, on balance, I think the schools it's been working well, and I think everybody's relieved that we're back in school. But there has been a steady increase in schools, as you would expect, given what we're seeing outside the schools.
All righty, Gordon. Well, thanks a lot. We'll just keep checking in every week to see what's the latest on COVID. And I know people are certainly welcoming the arrival of those vaccines. All righty, Steph, over to you. It's Election Day tomorrow, and then some important runoffs in Orleans.
Right. The big one, of course, is for District Attorney to replace Leon Cannizzaro, who is leaving office after 2 6-year terms, 12 years, so a long time. The runoff candidates are City Councilman at Large Jason Williams and Kiva Landrum, who recently left a judgeship to run. She's a former prosecutor. She actually had been the interim DA after Eddie Jordan left the office back before Cannizzaro, way back when. So it's turned into a bit of a battle. They're old friends. They now call themselves former friends. They went to law school together at Tulane. And there are a couple of storylines. One of the big ones, of course, is that Jason Williams is under indictment. This is not something that happens every day for a candidate for district attorney, but he is under a federal indictment. He is proceeding anyway, and the kind of debate is he is awaiting trial. He says he's innocent. Kiva Landrum has said, you're entitled to your presumption of innocence, but if you get elected, we're all in this with you. You're taking the city into the court with you, and you're distracted, and that's not what we need. That's her argument. His argument is, look, I understand what it's like to be accused, and this makes me, this gives me kind of insight into the system. And he, of course, is running as very much a criminal justice reformer, looking at reducing mass incarceration and making sure that people get a fair shot when they're accused. So he's kind of working it into his philosophical argument, which I think is, kind of the only choice you have if you're in his position.
And let me ask you, the third place finisher, former Judge Arthur Hunter, who finished very close third place, did he endorse anything?
He is not endorsed. Some of his supporters have endorsed Jason Williams. They both kind of come out of the criminal justice reform movement. One of the interesting things is that Kiva Landrum does not really come out of that movement, but she's embracing it. She is saying, I am a reformer. I believe in these various steps to not lock as many people up, specifically not lock as many people accused of nonviolent offenses up. The idea that it's really been, very harmful to communities. I mean, this is a part of a big bipartisan movement nationally. And so that's kind of another, way of looking at the race. Jason Williams is a defense attorney. He comes out, and on the city council, he's really pushed legislation that is reform-minded. He's a big opponent of Leon Cannizzaro, who is, kind of old school, tough on crime. Right. And so, he's kind of saying he's the real reformer. He's the one who has the chops and who has the record. And her argument is more, she supports these measures, but there's kind of a balance needed. She's talking more about victims and how she as a prosecutor has worked with victims. And for example, there are certain controversial practices that they both say they will scale back. Things like using the habitual offender law in the state, which allows people who are accused of multiple crimes to get kind of really tougher sentences, and that has been used as a plea bargaining tool, and it's really been used with people to lock up people who have committed nonviolent offenses. Jason Williams says he won't do it. Kiva Landrum says she mostly will not do it, but there might be cases.
Let me jump in. Turnout here, and
yes,
certainly not like it was, and not expected for election day.
It won't be. I mean, that was the presidential race. Yeah. You can't compete with that, so it will be a lower turnout.
It's a tight race.
It's a tight race. Yes.
Okay, Doug. Let's talk about some other controversial issues. One particularly, the millage renewal.
Okay, that's Orleans Parish. Yeah. This is a complicated thing that people are going to have to figure out.
And you don't have that much time to talk about it.
There are 3 questions. They are presented by the mayor as a package. There are millages that are expiring a year from now, and the millage rate, if they all pass, will be the same, but the money will be allocated differently. So the big controversy here is that there is a library millage, one of 2 library millages. There was another one passed a few years ago that remains in effect. This one is expiring next year, and the proposal is for it to be reduced pretty significantly, and for some of that money to go towards early childhood education, but also towards economic development, infrastructure, some other things. So the opposition is really based on the idea that the libraries would see what is a 40% revenue cut. Now, if people vote against this, then the millage will expire and they'll see a cut anyway, unless there's another proposal in the interim, because we do have a year. But the mayor is now, she's playing hardball here. She said just recently, just this week, that if these millages aren't passed, there could be layoffs. Right now, the budget for the coming year has furloughs built in. She said those could turn into layoffs.
But these millages don't expire for a year.
Correct.
And that's what the BGR pointed out. They said, look, not this go round. Let's rework this. We can revisit it.
Again, we have a year. Now, it's an election year, but we do have a year, and that's what really most, the people really rallying around the libraries are saying. Let's come back and do it. We're not going to let this thing go away. We just need to protect the libraries.
I mean, certainly all important issues. So I guess we'll see what the voters say tomorrow.
And of course, early childhood education is a huge issue too. So
very important issue.
Tough.
Okay, dokes, Stephanie, thanks a lot.
Sure.
Let's move now over to E and continue to talk about runoffs of Public Service Commission.
Public Service Commissioner. This is the Public Service Commissioner has 5 members. It is the district that is the largest of all the political districts in the state. Like for Congress, there's 6 congressional districts. For the state Supreme Court, there's 7. And so the biggest district that you run in is the Public Service Commission district. And of course, that becomes expensive, and that helps raise issues that people have. Well, where are you getting your money from to run? And so it could just be the nature of the structure. It could have a corrupting influence, not to imply that anybody was doing anything that was corrupt, but that's just, becomes a problem. But in the runoff tomorrow is Eric Skrmeta, who's a Republican, who's running for his 3rd term. These are 6-year terms, and they're scattered. And he got into a runoff against a guy named Alan Bourne, who's a Democrat, who's an attorney. Skrmeta got 31%, Bourne got 25%. Party label doesn't have a whole lot to do in these elections. There's always one issue that people care about, and that's who can keep my utility rates low. Skrmeta and the current Public Service Commission are taking bows for that because utility rates have gone down the last few years, but Bourne points out, well, that's because the price of natural gas has gone down, and natural gas is what fuels all of the plants. Meanwhile, Bourne is saying of Skrmeta that he is taking contributions from some of the big industries that he has to regulate. Skrmeta admits to it. He says, yeah, but still, we do our job in terms of who we regulate. And so it comes down to that, 31% versus 25%. You got a thing going anyway. If people vote label, the district is more Republican than it is Democrat. It goes pretty much along the river with the largest part of the population being in Jefferson and St. Tammany Parish. Something that's curious about the Public Service Commission is that historically it was once seen as being a launching pad for governor. Going back in 1928 when Huey Long was elected, he was elected on a populist. It was a great job to be a populist. Vote for me and I'll keep your utility rates low. Since then, there was Huey Long, Jimmy Davis, John McKithen, and Kathleen Blanco, who were all at one time Public Service Commissioners. A few years ago, a guy named Lewis Lambert got into the general election. He lost, but he was still able to catapult it. And so it has always been a political powerhouse of a position if someone chose to be political with it. And so, who knows? Maybe we'll see.
We'll see where the runoff goes tomorrow. Okay, real quick now, can you touch on the congressional seat?
Upstate, 5th Congressional District. This was Ralph Abraham, whose seat, he only served 3 terms. You may remember him from the gubernatorial election last year. He ran, finished third. He decided not to run again. There are 2 people, and this is both Republicans, a guy named Lance Harris, who's a representative from Alexandria, and a guy named Luke Letlow, who is on the staff of Abraham. And Letlow is arguing, look, I got the experience. I was part of the staff. I know my way around.
Okay.
On the other hand, people are saying, yeah, but you also, before you worked for Abraham, worked for Bobby Jindal. Abraham's very popular in the district. Bobby Jindal's not. So.
Okay, we'll see. Election day tomorrow. Thanks a lot, E. David, over to you. Another name surfaces in the church scandals.
Yeah, the Catholic Church scandal, we've been following it through our Losing Faith investigation, myself and Ramon Vargas from the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate. And what we found over the months has been many cases where names are not being released, or there's a feeling that there's strong evidence that a priest or clergyman has sexually abused minors, and that was brought to the archdiocese, but their name has not been placed on the list of credibly accused clergy. And this week, it was something different that we haven't seen a lot of, and that is that Archbishop Amond named a new name that's Joseph DeWater. He did not put him on the list, but he said publicly that he's under investigation, and that's a name that we have not seen before. But it also came at the same time that he was adding a new name to the list of credibly accused clergy, Father Robert Cooper. This is the late Robert Cooper, because there's another priest named Robert Cooper who is currently alive in the archdiocese, and this is not him. He's not related to him. This is a man who died in 1989, who Ramon and I found with a story that we did 2 months ago in early October, that there were credible claims against him dating back 13 years where the church had actually paid for therapy for an alleged victim who had come forward to the archbishop back in 2010, as long ago as 2010. And they never put him on the list, which was released originally in 2018. So we questioned that. There were 2 corroborating witnesses who had more evidence. And now, 2 months after we did that story, that name is now on the list because we learned that an additional victim came forward after that story aired.
Okay, and so more about DeWater now. And so his name, you said, is not on the list. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Joseph DeWater, he was a pretty prominent priest here in the 1970s. He actually led the Catholic Committee on Girl Scouting here, and he ended up in a number of different positions in different parishes, ending up serving 15 years from 1986 to 2001 at a parish in New Orleans East, and he actually had the gymnasium there named after him. That parish actually ceased to exist after Hurricane Katrina, and that gymnasium has been torn down. And he retired and moved to the Netherlands, and he lives in a nursing home in the Netherlands. I reached out to him there. We've not been able to reach him, but now he has been named publicly by the Archdiocese as being under a formal investigation for claims of abuse from back when he was in the New Orleans area.
Okay, David, well, thanks to you and, of course, to Ramon, too, for keeping us posted and keeping up with all of this. And the comments from the Archdiocese?
Well, the Archdiocese says that they welcome people to come forward with new claims. They say that they're really pushing forward on this, and that you're going to hear a lot more coming up here in the future because there's a bar date involving the bankruptcy case. So they're going to be doing advertising to encourage people to come forward and make their claims before that date in March that would bar any further claims from coming forward.
All right, David, thanks a lot. Let's go back on over to Gordon right now. And the issue of split juries. We know more in Louisiana, but there was a hearing this week before the U.S. Supreme Court. Right.
So as you probably remember, Louisianans voted to change the law so that we would no longer have these non-unanimous verdicts starting in January of this year. And then more recently, in April of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court took up this case and ruled that non-unanimous jury verdicts were unconstitutional. And only, as you remember, probably only 2 states had these, Oregon and Louisiana. And Oregon still had theirs. We had already gotten rid of ours. But there was the question then of what about all the cases that have already been decided on non-unanimous jury verdicts, which is kind of a thorny question. And there's about the Promise of Justice Institute, which is litigating this, has said they believe there's about 1,500 mostly men serving time in state prisons. Most of them are doing life based on non-unanimous jury verdicts. And the question is, what happens to them now that this law has been deemed unconstitutional? And so the Supreme Court took up that question Wednesday in a case that originated out of Baton Rouge in a 2006 crime spree. And the court seemed, skeptical. They have a very high bar for applying these rulings retroactively. And it's kind of an arcane legal concept, but it has to do with whether the change in law is considered a watershed. And they're not sure that this meets that bar. There was a lot of skeptical questioning. It's pretty clear that some judges think that this should be applied retroactively and some think that it shouldn't, but there's some who are in the middle. It was a 6-3 majority that decided the case to rule the law unconstitutional, but it may not break down the same way this time. That was not the usual conservative and liberal bloc. It was 1 liberal member and 2 conservatives who wanted to keep the law in place, and it wasn't the usual fault lines of the Supreme Court. So the question again is whether this is a big enough deal, and I think the people who are serving life in prison on these verdicts that have since been deemed unconstitutional would say, of course it's a big deal and it's a watershed ruling and I should have a new trial or I should be released. But the state argued this also and said this would be a really, their argument was that this would be a really big deal for the state to try to have to retry these people after all these years, which it would be very difficult, especially for cases you're talking about. Some of these are 20 or 30 years old. A lot of them are cases that have been litigated in the last few years that wouldn't be as hard.
But let me ask you, as it stands right now...
Isn't there a big issue here?
Go ahead, David.
Sorry. Isn't there a big issue here with it being part of the old Jim Crow and the fact that, like, the guy who's actually brought the appeal here in the case that's being heard was convicted with the 1 black juror voting for him to be acquitted?
Yes. That came up in the case, and Brett Kavanaugh, one of the new justices on the court, was actually really made a point of that and said that was a case where we believe there was 1 black juror, and that black juror, it was a black defendant, and the black juror voted against conviction. I don't know that that is an important aspect of this whole debate, to be sure, but I'm not sure that that's the aspect that the court finds most compelling. I think the court is looking at whether or not this is such a drastic change in law that it requires retroactive applicability.
So if they go for the retroactive, how many cases are involved here, would you say? The
estimate is about 1,500 cases in Louisiana. There's not an exact, it's not the easiest thing to track down, but that's about, the Promise of Justice Institute, which is a nonprofit, has been researching this, and that's what they've come up with.
Those who have their cases on appeal, this impacts them already, right?
Exactly. So cases that are not through the final appellate process, which often takes a couple of years after a verdict is rendered, those people are going to get new trials. So we've already had news about cases like the Cardell Hayes, who was convicted of murdering Will Smith. He'll get a new trial, for instance, and dozens, probably maybe 100 others will get new trials.
All righty, Gordon, thanks a lot. Let's jump back over quick to Errol to wrap us up. New look for Clearview City Center.
Around the country, we're seeing examples of shopping centers really in trouble now as the shopping center industry, as the department stores are in trouble. Not all of them, but some of them, and certainly Clearview is an example. And so usually what they're looking at is some kind of a multi-use facility. Still keep maybe like an anchor department store there and a few others, but have other uses, including medical and restaurants and theater and recreation, all the usual things that you'd suspect. Well, yesterday we finally saw some proof where Oxner announced that it was going to take over the old Sears building and develop what what he calls a super clinic, and have all kinds of different facilities. Start off with about 40 different positions, and really have a presence. And curiously, Oxnard already has a presence on veterans by Bonneville. This sounds like it's going to be a lot bigger. Unclear what's going to happen to that. And it's not too far from East Jefferson, which of course is in Oxnard. So this area will be well served with hospitals. But yeah, the name is curious. Clearview City Center. Just think, when before have we seen in an area retail and shopping and hotels and all those kind of services all together? And that was in urban downtowns. And so in a sense, they're bringing back what urban downtowns used to offer, with the advantage probably of having better parking. But if you remember in downtown New Orleans, some of the old buildings, like the Maison Blanche building and the Pierre Marquette building, what were most of the tenants in there? There was doctors' offices. And so in a sense, the buildings in downtown was doing those kind of services.
And Clearview City Center now is also going to have a residential component.
Yeah, as do downtowns, and so in a sense, it's bringing back some of the amenities that downtowns used to have, but maybe also a little bit more of the luxury that the suburbs can offer in terms of space.
Okay, so we're really going to see, like Oxnard, I know, I think they said the end of 2022.
We'll probably see the first signs, and then the whole project will be over a few years.
Okie doke. All right, E, thanks a lot. Going to stay with you. Roundtable, other stories.
December 14th, the New Orleans Pelicans play their first preseason games. Mercifully, there'll only be 2 preseason games this year. And then a couple weeks after that, they open the regular season. And so professional basketball season is approaching right after it's almost finished a few weeks ago.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot. Stephanie, to you.
Still more elections tomorrow. In Orleans Parish, we have a couple of lingering judge runoffs and a number of school board seats.
Okay.
So read up before you go.
Gordon?
Follow up on the elections. We're waiting for a ruling from Judge Marty Feldman in federal court about whether Jason Williams' indictment on tax charges will be thrown out or not. Could come as soon as today. I suspect it won't, but something else affecting that election.
All righty. And David?
I'm very excited, like everybody, that there's going to be a vaccine coming for COVID-19, but there's still people who are in hospitals and struggling with the disease now, and even more as we go forward. So I'm very proud to be part of a public service campaign to tell people who have had it, like I have, to donate their convalescent plasma. I've been doing that 6 times now, and you can help people. So if you've had it, please donate your plasma.
Helping out people quite a bit, but also those who have had it are being told you should really be vaccinated as well.
Right.
Correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, doke. All right.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, guys, for joining us, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.